we have a data file containing 200 random numbers. We want to write a program which will open that data file, read the 200 random numbers, and find the maximum and minimum of those numbers. The program should output the maximum and minimum values back to the screen. And notice for this case, if you're using our sample code, the CMake directory will already have this line of code in it, but otherwise, remember you can set the current directory to be the place where CLion looks for your data files. So let's try coding up this demo and follow along if you'd like. So I'm starting out with an empty main function. Let's just briefly review what we need to do. Well, we need to declare variables to hold file name, maximum value, minimum value. We also need a variable to store the next item which was read from the file. So if we look in our sample code here, I do have a data file that is called 200randomnumbers.txt, and you can see it does indeed contain 200 random numbers. They are all integers which happen to be larger than 0. So in this case, I'm working with integers, but you never know, someone could have been mean and thrown a double in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and declare double variables to hold my numbers, just to be safe, in case there was ever a decimal in that data file. So let's declare those variables. So let's make an input file name to hold the input file. What else do we need? We need next value to store the next value that we read. We also need to declare the maximum value and the minimum value. These are, again, to hold current max and minimum values. And so we've declared our variables. So the next thing we need to do is declare our input file stream objects. Here we are only writing to a file, we are only reading from a file. We do not have to output to any files. So we only need an input file stream object because we are just reading from a file. So I'm just going to go ahead and name my input file stream object infile. Next, I need to open my data file. So I go infile.open, and remember, the data will be stored in the input file name. How do I know what my input file name is? Well, I gotta ask my user, right? So here we'll just say, please enter the name of the data file. And then we'll take in our input file name. And we'll open the data file using the open function. Remember, we also need to check for file opening errors. So we can say if our input file failed to open, what do? Then we can give ourselves a message. And then I'm going to go ahead and exit with code 0. So assuming we have a valid file name, we are now ready to start reading from our file. Let's use a loop to read all the items, or let's say to read each item from the file one at a time. So here I want to read as long as my input file stream object is able to read the next value. Then I start my loop. So what do I want to do here? Well, I just read the next value, so I need to check whether the next value is a minimum or a maximum value. And you'll see we don't necessarily know what range of values file might have. So if you are ever writing a program where you need to find the minimum and maximum, a good practice is to use the first item in your data file as the initial minimum and maximum. Then you can compare all the other values in the file to the first value. So before I start my loop, I'm going to read the first value from my file and set the minimum and maximum to that value initially. So here I'll say in file next item, next value, and then I'll say max value is next value. And also min value will be assigned next value. So notice I have read the first value into next value, and I set minimum and maximum to this very first value. Then here, when I start my loop, I'm actually reading the second value from the file, also reusing my variable next value. But I can check now whether that next value I read is larger or smaller than the current maximum. So I can say, all right, let's check. Is the newly read value larger than the current maximum? And is the newly read value smaller than the current minimum? So to check that, I can just simply say if next value, which we just read, if next value is greater than max value, well, then what do? Then I set max value to be, we update max value to be the new higher value, right? So if I read the next value in my file and I discover that that next value is higher than my initial maximum, I update my maximum value to store the new higher value. Similarly, I can check whether next value is less than my minimum value. And then if I am less, then I say min value is equal to next value. So notice I update min value to be the new minimum value, or the new lower value. So that's all we need to do in this loop for now. We're reading each item from the file one at a time. We are checking whether the item we just read is a new maximum and minimum value. If so, we update our variables. Finally, when our loop is finished, let's go ahead and first close our data file. And then we can output our maximum and minimum. So we output our maximum and we output our minimum. So just like that. Let's go ahead and try running this one. So here we go. Please enter the name of the data file to process. Well, I want to process 200 random numbers.txt. And hey, look at that. I found my maximum value is 100, my minimum value is 1. That looks about right. Let's try just for fun. What happens if we set the fourth value to something really big and maybe the eighth value to something really small, right? Let's make sure that we didn't just get lucky. Oh, well, see that? We correctly found our maximum and minimum. Another thing you could do is try modifying this program that we wrote in order to also find the sum and the average. If I wanted to do that, and declare a summing value and initialize to 0, and then I would also declare a counting value and initialize to 0 to count the values read. And notice here, I would just need to go back in. When I read the first value, I'd need to make sure I remembered to add the first value to the sum. And I'd also need to increment my counter. And then inside my loop, I could do the same thing. I could just add, I can add the next value to my cumulative sum. And I increment my counter. And this way, I can see what my sum will be. And then, of course, my average, we read how many values? We read count values. And then we can say the average is, I'm getting a warning. Oh, it looks like it doesn't like my indentation there. I did indent too deeply. So remember, I don't want these to be part of that if statement, but let's just go ahead and do Control-Alt-L to tidy up my code. Auto format. And Let's go ahead and try running this. And look at that. Maximum minimum we have, sum is 37. Our sum looks a little bit off, doesn't it? Because we read 200 values. Let's make sure that we did this correctly. Do you see what happened there? I accidentally commented out my sum. That's not correct. That's why my sum was so low. So let's try that again. And there we go. Notice we actually ended with a pretty large sum, and that was due in part to this large number being present in there, and we got an average too. So if we reduce that number, we'll see our average will be, see now we get maximum minimum sum, and again, that's because we don't have that large number in there, the values are a bit more reasonable. So please try playing around with this program a bit. See if you could sum only the multiples of 3, or find the average of just the first 5 numbers. You could play with this a little bit. You'll find the more you play around with these different types of code, the easier it will be to manipulate files. Lastly, let's just briefly demonstrate what happens if we give it a bad file. Notice if we have a bad data file, our error message triggers. Well, I hope everybody found this demo helpful. And if you have any other questions about it, please feel free to reach out.